So our next speaker, before we take a little bit of a seventh inning stretch, is Derek Riedle. Derek? Where's he? There he is, yeah. So Derek's doing something interesting. Generally speaking, when we discuss marijuana, people talk about the product, they talk about the law, they talk about the science. Derek's interested in the culture that surrounds the product, and his interest is to elevate it in the eyes of society.
Absolutely.
Derek, go ahead.
Thank you, Moses. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Everything is a little bit better when I'm stoned. That was the takeaway of the New Brunswick Telegraph-Journal after last week's inaugural World Cannabis Congress held in St. John, New Brunswick. And it pissed me off. I'll tell you why. 450 of the brightest minds in cannabis from around the globe descended on St. John. There were policy leaders, there were political leaders, there were CEOs from all over the world. It was a smash hit. And on the other side of it, people were referring to it as the Davos of cannabis, as the IdeaCity of cannabis, as the Sundance of cannabis. We had Anne McClellan. We had Vicente Fox. We talked about the future of an industry. We learned more and more about the legal environment in Canada, what the landscape will look like. We made connections and we made deals. We unveiled the Global Cannabis Partnership, a nonprofit organization that is tasked with creating a worldwide social responsibility standard for the safe and responsible production, distribution, and consumption of legal recreational cannabis. It was endorsed by 16 foundational members. Serious stuff. Those are some pretty great companies up there. And so I'd been looking for a little bit more support from the largest daily paper in the province. I'd been looking for coverage that spoke about cannabis and what we were doing in a more fulsome way. But why? Because between us, I don't really have a whole lot of issue with the headline itself. Cannabis does make everything a little bit better for me. That's not the issue here. The issue is that I know public support for the new cannabis industry depends on education, on changing perceptions, and reducing stigmas. We need to get beyond the dated stoner stereotype. And media must help, media should help, media can help. Don't get me wrong, we've come a long way in cannabis already. The culture is being elevated. It's been a pretty fast pace in the last couple of years. More and more jurisdictions are coming online all the time. And the industry is maturing. Governments are giving people the legal license to enjoy cannabis. It's the social license that needs a lot of work. And the storyline remains the same for many traditional publishers. Stigmas and stereotypes persist. So let me tell you a bit about me. I am a father, I am a husband, I am an entrepreneur, and I love cannabis. I'm not an everyday guy. I'm a guy who comes from the Maritimes, who used to like to try and drink too many beers on Friday and Saturday night. And the older I got, the more I became interested in cannabis, and the more I realized it was a better and healthy option for me. I knew I wasn't the only one. There had to be others like me who enjoyed cannabis but didn't read High Times. We saw an opportunity. We saw an opportunity to engage in a conversation, and in doing so, to help reduce the stigma and elevate cannabis culture. When Civilized was born, it was just before Justin Trudeau's election as Prime Minister and well before President Trump's election in Washington. It was an exciting time. Suddenly, people felt free to have conversations that they couldn't have before. Suddenly, people felt a little bit more comfortable talking about their consumption. They wanted to live more authentic lives, to break free of the cannabis closet that's been created by prohibition. Civilized and other cannabis-focused media are working to educate and highlight the changing face of cannabis. We've built huge followings, and the sheer magnitude of our tribes has in part expedited the arrival of this new and modern cannabis culture. And the new culture will increase the likelihood that we'll see a more progressive and consistent approach to cannabis legalization and regulation around the world, which will create social change and economic development opportunities. So my call to action to everybody is just this. That's not me. If you consume, if you enjoy cannabis, if you work in the industry, if you just simply support this industry and support cannabis, we need people to step forward and raise their hands. We need people to know that we're not potheads, or as I call these guys, classic cannabis consumers. Every year, Civilized commissions research with PSB out of Washington. This last year, we found that 1/4 of North Americans enjoyed cannabis, that half of those make $50,000 a year or more, and 3/4 of them exercise at least once a week. Not exactly basement-dwelling stoners. But because 2/3 of people continue to hide their use, the stereotype persists. And by the way, of those who don't consume, 40% say they fear being judged, and that's what's keeping them from enjoying cannabis. Fear of being judged. It's not health concerns, it's stigma that's holding them back. You gotta let that land. I don't have to tell you about the great potential of this industry and why it's so important that we take a progressive approach to regulation. Since Donald Trump was elected, the 49th parallel has really become the boundary between certainty and uncertainty in cannabis. The money has followed, and there's no signs of it slowing down. And I like to say that Toronto has now become the cannabis capital of the world. There will be money, there will be taxes, there will be wealth that will be shifted from the black market to a legal one, to everybody's economic benefit, except the black market. And then there's the social benefits. Fewer arrests and fewer unnecessary records and incarcerations, the development of new forms of pain management and medicine, a potential answer to the opioid crisis, and then there's just guys like me who like to party on Friday night. There is broad support for these economic and social benefits, and there are millions of people out there, the canna-curious, I call them, who want to enjoy cannabis for the first time or for the first time again. But they're reluctant. They're reluctant at best, and they're fearful at worst. So reducing stigma and changing public perception will take education, corporate social responsibility, the media, and community. We're going to do our part, but you can help. Because cannabis needs you. Cannabis needs role models. Role models like Chelsea Handler, who, in addition to saying some funny things last week, had some deep insights into female-specific cannabis stigmas that are preventing women in large numbers from enjoying cannabis. Role models like the CEOs, entrepreneurs, and policymakers who joined us at the World Cannabis Congress. Role models like the founding members of the Global Cannabis Partnership. And role models like these, who remind us that cannabis can and should be fun. If you want to get your party on, you should have the right to get your party on. So, role models like my fellow presenters and role models like all of you, whose support and leadership will usher in the new cannabis revolution that we're all here to talk about today. Thank you.
Derek, aren't we already partially along that path that you advocate? Because once upon a time it was called pot.
Yeah.
It was called weed. It was called grass, and it was called shit.
Yeah.
And now everybody calls it cannabis.
Yeah, look, we're on that continuum, and there's many of us who are further down the road than others, but we do have a long way to go. And as I said, 40% of people are fearful just of what people are going to think of them. We need to elevate this culture. We need to change the story around this, and it starts with language.
And I thought it was very intriguing and interesting of you to call your publication Civilized.
It starts with language. Moses, thank you.
All right.
Thank you very kindly.
Thank you.